Welcome back to the Methods of Awakening podcast, episode 4. We're almost done with the narration of the old material, so we'll need to get some more stuff written and actually produce new content. Bearing in mind that I haven't done much writing about this stuff for almost 10 years now, so it'll take me some time to get back into the swing of it. I had posted on the Dharma Overground Facebook page for the first time in years, never even realising that the page had almost 1,000 followers. I forget sometimes just how mainstream this sort of hardcore meditation practice has become, and how many people are out there looking for something useful that they can really sink their teeth into. So I basically blagged some free advertising for the Methods of Awakening Facebook page, but I do sometimes miss the forums and the discussions. Personally, I'm at a stage in my own practice where silence is golden. The 4 powers of the Sphinx, to put it cryptically, have become a lived experience, so to describe my practice or document it publicly as I once did now seems completely pointless. All it'll do is create confusion where there doesn't need to be any, and surely that's one of the things that awakening, however you describe it, aims at getting rid of. Anyhow, in this episode of the podcast, I'll be taking a look back at a post called Stop Jhana Time, which was written based on my understanding of the word jhana at the time and its use in the context of Buddhism. Nowadays, I don't even know whether I'm happy to use the term jhana, simply because so much debate exists about its correct usage and the states that it refers to. I can't say with any real confidence that what I experience as the jhanic strata is the same thing as what the Buddha described. It's far too complicated to really go into it right now, but suffice it to say, I will likely phase out the term just to avoid any problems or confusion as we go. So I realise I'm progressively saying more at the start of these recordings each time I do them, so hopefully my preamble is at least vaguely interesting and you enjoy the podcast as it comes. Stop. Jhana time. In a previous post, I talked about access concentration as being the foundation of meditation practice. So I suppose it makes sense to continue the discussion by talking about what gets built on top of this fine but very basic foundation. I'll use the Buddhist framework to describe this, as it's a simple but incredibly accurate model, although I'll try my best to describe any map-specific terminology in terms of actual practice and physical or mental sensation, so as to avoid overcomplicating this. When it comes down to it, all of these things are basically mental exercises that facilitate the process of recognising the natural state as it is. So, you've gotten into access concentration. You're inside your meditative bubble, nicely focused on the breath and grooving on the pleasant sensations currently running through your body, and boink, all of a sudden there's something different. A change or a shift of some sort. The breath feels very stable and clear. You notice these lovely, subtle, shimmering sensations beneath the skin, but you just keep coming back to the breath. You might notice that your eyes have become focused on the area right in front of your nose, lazily resting in a downwards position, but not in any way sleepy. You may notice that if you let your concentration flag, the eye focus comes back up and some of the pleasant bodily stuff goes away. Perhaps you'll notice that if you shift the attention to the pleasant sensations themselves, they increase without having to do anything other than focus on them. Welcome to what some consider to be the first jhana, as described by the Buddha in the early texts. Just like access concentration, I thought that jhanas were something reserved for long-time yogis and adepts, but as I mentioned in the previous post, that turned out to be nothing more than unhelpful thinking. If anything, jhanic states are probably common to anyone who seriously practices meditation, and continued practice showed me that I already had access to jhana before even getting stream entry. Once I understood what jhanas were, i.e., strata of mind accessed through focused concentration and attention, it became easier to identify when a jhanic state was accessed, and thus easier to identify the various aspects of each one, to examine them again and again, gaining insight through the application of vipassana. If we take the basic instructions from my Access Concentration article and use that as a starting point, it will make it easier to cut to the chase and describe some of the phenomenological details which should hopefully make the recognition of first jhana easier. It's worth mentioning at this stage that my word should not be taken as final on any of this stuff. Everything I describe should be taken away, tested empirically, and not accepted at face value. Put another way, don't believe a word in it. Assuming that you're already familiar with the state of access concentration, see how long you can remain stabilised in that. Remain with the breath. It will still require a certain amount of effort to maintain, but the mental focus will remain essentially the same. Just keep the attention rested on the breath. There's no need to go investigating the bare sensations or picking the entire in-out cycle apart bit by bit. Insight practice is a different matter and is something I'll go into another time. But for the moment, try to understand that concentration practice, aka samatha or samatha, depending who you are or what you're into, simply requires that one stays 100% focused on a specific object, be it the breath, a kasina, mantra, or deity. You'll probably already be aware of very pleasant tingling sensations, or just this general emotional tone of everything feeling really nice. It feels very simple and clear. Nothing spectacular, but it's evident quite quickly once you've been practicing for a while. It's a feeling you'll probably recognise quite easily once it's been pointed out to you. It's common in good meditation practice, but can go unnoticed, especially if, like me, you were expecting some sort of firework display of bliss and joy. Goosebumps may be experienced at this point, or a sort of shimmering, tingling all over your body. This is what Buddhists call piti, which translates as rapture or joy, words which may suggest something more substantial than their initial experiencing provides. However, this is merely the weak stages of piti, and it will become staggeringly clear why words like joy and rapture are more sufficient to describe the experience. If you gently incline the mind towards those sensations, without trying to change them or alter them in any way, then you can allow them to become more apparent. With continued, applied attention exclusively to those sensations, but still returning to the breath should you become distracted, that sense of joyfulness will increase of its own accord. What will also become apparent is a sense of mental ease, of well-being and happiness which seems to occur by itself. This is what's known in Buddhism as sukha, and along with vitakka and vikara, makes up one of the 4 jhanic factors, which leads me to the occurrence of thinking in jhanic states is something that can throw people a bit. But those last 2 Pali words, vitakka and vikara, will allow us to develop a little more clarity on the matter. Vitakka roughly translates as applied thinking, basically where mind makes contact with a mental object, aka a thought occurs. Vikara translates as something like sustained thinking, which is the continued application of thought leading to discernment of the object. So it defines the specific details and allows for its identification. Essentially, we could say that vitakka means the thought itself at the moment it's perceived, and vikara means the discernment of the qualities of that thought. What I'm trying to say is that thought and thinking continue to occur in the first jhana, contrary to what some people may have you believe. However, they can appear quite different to how they're normally experienced. When you actually hit first jhana, there will be a definite sense of being in an altered state of consciousness, usually preceded by some sense of a mental shift. That shift may be very obvious or very subtle depending on the depth of your practice, but when it happens, you'll recognise it. The senses may seem softened in some way, and there may be a sense of light in the visual field which, if focused on, becomes brighter or expands. This is what's known as a nimitta, which means characteristic or sign. It's a natural occurrence and shouldn't be viewed as any more important than any other sensation, however dazzling it may be at first. The body can feel very relaxed, but you must remain attentive so as to avoid slouching, as this will lead to sleepiness and distraction. Sounds may seem somewhat distant, as if they're just happening elsewhere, only being recognised as sound and then let go of without further interpretation or mental narrative about it. It really is as simple as learning to rest the attention on those pleasant bodily sensations. Doing this will lead to the arising of the other jhanic factors, each of which will only really be discerned through dedicated practice. Don't get hung up on trying to identify any of this at first. Just stick to what's going on in the body and it will definitely become clearer with time. No amount of reading about it will cause it to make sense. It has to be experienced directly to be understood, and when it does happen in your own practice, you'll understand why I go on about that so much. So, to summarise, firstly we get into access concentration, and then turn the attention towards those pleasant, tingling, dynamic sensations wherever they are in the body, however subtle or obvious they may be. If you're practicing correctly, these sensations will appear without a doubt, so you don't need to go looking for them or sit there waiting for them to happen. Stay present and attentive, and don't drift off into a mental reverie. But if you do, there's no need to beat yourself up about it. As you did when cultivating access concentration, bring the attention back to the breath. If you're still aware of any of those qualities of the jhanic state when you become distracted, focus back on those. If not, return back to the breath and again just let it happen naturally. What I've written above here, or spoken above, should be a fairly reliable way to incline the mind towards what some consider to be the first jhana. It's very straightforward, but it does require consistent and dedicated practice. It's possible to get into what could be called jhana light, which is like a weak state of absorption in those sensations, and this in itself is quite sufficient to begin applying vipassana to the experience. Jhanas, like all other states and stages, are as empty and transient as any other, and can be investigated with bare attention. Which brings me to... As I just said, jhanas are as empty and transient as anything else you can experience. They're ultimately no different to the sensations that make up your little finger. No sensations, states, or experiences last. None exists apart from awareness, and none can be found outside of their own experiencing. The Buddha laid out the three characteristics, and they are undeniably evident in the moment-by-moment experience of every human being. Impermanence, not self, and suffering, also known as anicca, anatta, and dukkha. They represent three seals of experience in that, regardless of where we look, how we look, who's looking, all phenomena are subject to change, none contain or can be said to be a self, and none are able to provide any real or lasting satisfaction. I defy anyone to look closely and sincerely at their own experience right now, their bare sensate experience as these 6 streams of sense consciousness, and find anything permanent or anything that contains or could be a self. There is literally nothing which is not constantly changing at some level. Even mountains are subject to erosion, but this is something we can experience directly for ourselves by simply looking at the way in which reality is perceived on the bare sensate level or on a moment-by-moment basis. The problem with jhanas is that they are incredibly seductive and can give one the impression that they're more realised than they actually are. They can be mind-blowing sometimes, but they can also just be a pleasant break from the stresses of everyday life. However, the Buddha taught insight and morality as well as concentration, so this should be borne in mind. There's nothing wrong with enjoying concentration states. Learning to abide in them is a skill in itself, but when it begins to interfere with your practice and become the be-all and end-all, then it's time to bring in some insight. Worse still, continuing to get deeper into meditative states can sometimes interfere with and impinge upon your daily life. This is more of an issue for advanced practitioners whose concentration skills are more highly developed, but it is possible to experience hallucinations, altered states, or things that seem to be out with rational explanation. It really is. I'm not even kidding. When you get into the really kind of hardcore retreat level concentration states, yeah, it's a bit mental to say the least. Anyway, at all times, the sincere practitioner should bear the three characteristics in mind and experience them directly, even in the most elevated states, since even those are not exempt from the Dharma seals. To cling to any state, no matter how glorious or beautiful it seems, is a grave error which will not lead to liberation. Every sensation experienced at every sense door can be seen directly to be without any ultimate source, without a beginning or end, just a process of change. It is all empty of meaning and devoid of information until the mind begins to construct a story around it, turning it into an I and creating a subject to this fresh, new object. All that said, it's not like there's not considerable benefit to be had from cultivating concentration states. Even getting into first jhana leads to the temporary suppression of the five hindrances, and higher states eliminate conscious thought entirely, revealing something fundamental about the nature of reality. It's just a case of using them with moderation. Some of the experiences possible through strong concentration, especially while you're on retreat, can be incredibly seductive and can even convince you, for a while at least, that you're completely awakened. Jhana is an excellent baseline from which to do insight practice. The mind is stabilised, and the natural focus of first jhana is conducive to the sort of targeted investigation required when practicing vipassana. The optimal jhanic strata to begin with for insight practice is, in my opinion, fourth, as it offers a completely different mental focus or a frame which allows for a deeper, more open and effortless investigation into whichever sensations present themselves. I've ended up writing or saying more than I thought would be required for this, but I'm trying to ensure that I'm communicating the nuts and bolts of the practice clearly and how to actually do it. What I've written is just my opinion, based on my experience, and is subject to change at any time. Hopefully, what's there is sufficient to allow you to improve your practice, identify the first jhanic strata, and avoid some of the potential pitfalls of strong concentration practice. Thanks for listening, and the very best of luck to you in your practice. May you and all sentient beings end suffering in this lifetime. Take care. Peace. Practice well.